Welcome, everybody. Andrew Day's my name. Chris and I are both directors at Gifted Philanthropy, collectively have decades of experience actually in asking for money, but also, it's more importantly, and for those of you who are professional fundraisers, supporting our volunteer leaders to ask for money. It's a major part of every successful fundraising campaign. And this today's session is going to cover getting ready to ask. And then the next session on the 17th of June, next Tuesday, same time, same bat station, is going to look at the 5 steps to asking for money. But Chris, do you want to give a little bit of introduction to yourself as well?
Well, only to say, obviously, Andrew, thank you. Chris Goldie is my name. Like Andrew, I've been doing this for a very long time, working with wonderful fundraising people all over the country and wonderful volunteers to help them achieve great targets. Just to say a little bit of housekeeping, if you've got questions, we'll have time at the end. There's a Q&A box. If you put your questions in there, then we'll go through and I will ask the questions of people. People will join us as we go along. This is very much informal. We will talk you through this short presentation, um, chipping in as and when. I'll chip in. Andrew's going to lead. I'll chip in as and when we need to. And I think we'll go from there, really, Andrew. That's about as much as I need to say at this moment in time.
Good stuff. Well, it's appropriate. The bloke with the tie on actually should lead this. I'm still not catching up with modern sartorial codes. But yeah, so thank you, Chris. Look, I don't know if many of you recall, but it was a few years back now, I suppose, but the Times newspaper ran a piece, an article on having surveyed people about the scariest thing that you could ask anyone to do in Britain. And top of the list was actually asking someone you know for a gift to charity. People would rather run down their high street naked, bungee jump off the I don't know, the church tower or wherever, a higher site than that, hopefully, but do the most outrageous things, anything other than asking someone they know for money. And it is based on essentially the fear of rejection and losing face. I mean, again, maybe showing my age, Chris, and yours possibly, but when we were young men, we were taught there were certain things that you never ever discussed in polite company. When you went round to lunch at your neighbours or whatever, you never talked about politics, sex, religion, and money. Now, I think pretty much everything is fair game these days, except for money, which is why Chris and our colleague Amy and I decided that we wanted to write a book about this, and that's it there, which is called Gifted Asking: 5 Steps to Successfully Securing Major Gifts. And what we're going to do today is introduce you to the first part of that book, which is about preparing for asking. And at the end of today's session, we'll give you the contact details. So if you wish, you can get in touch with us and we will send you a complimentary copy of the book, Gifted Asking.
Shall I just add to that? This is the
Please do.
second. This is an updated version. So if you've already
Yeah.
got the first edition, then please get in touch and we'll happily send you the second one. Obviously, if you were at the IDP conference recently at Celtic Manor and came up and said hello, you probably would have taken one of these away with you. But it's got a blue cover, as you can see, but it is an updated version. The first one was done just after COVID and had various references to virtual.
Mm.
So we've removed a lot of that and brought this one up to date. So please do get in touch after this webinar by dropping us a line and we'll send you a new copy.
Yep, definitely. Anyway, it's a post-COVID world. Wow. Okay. So let's kick off and let's make a really important definitional distinction right from the beginning. What is the difference, if you like, between a donation and a gift? And I should stress that this asking process is about moving from donations and into gifts. So here we have the definition. A donation is something that is given to a charity, especially a sum of money, and we all know that, but it is often very reactive, and it's often due to pressures or feelings of guilt, and usually it's the change in the pocket. It's a low value response that you receive. Whereas, Chris, what's a gift?
Well, as you rightly say, Andrew, when we walk past somebody in the street who's collecting money for a cause that we happen to like, we dip our hands in our pockets and we hand over some loose change. A gift is something much more structured and thoughtful. When we think about birthday presents or Christmas gifts, we think about what it is we're going to buy for the person, what that person may like, what might appeal to them. And what we're trying to do financially in philanthropy is encourage people to make gifts to something that they want to support. So it's a gift that is giving willing, it's something that is giving willingly to someone, and you're not paying for it. You're not saying you give me tenner and I'll give you 20 or whatever it might be, or I'll give you £2 back. You might be offering them some recognition for it, but it's considered. That's the
Mm.
most important thing is the individual donor, particularly your higher net worth donors, your major donors, will be thinking very seriously about what it is they're going to support. So they'll be thinking about the level of the gift and why they want to support it. And very often these are driven by strong personal feelings and a belief or a strong relationship with whatever cause that might be. And as
Mm.
a result, as I said, these are generally major gifts. They're higher in value. They're not simply reactive. They are considered, thought through, and therefore of greater value.
They're a bit like a birthday gift. If you're selecting a gift for your partner, you spend time, don't you, thinking about exactly what you might get them. You spend time even wrapping them, writing a nice card. You think about the moment, possibly, Chris, if you're being truly romantic about the moment when you're going to make that gift or present it to them. That's what a gift is. It's a very considered, thought through process. It's not just about the value. But it is most particularly about the thoughtfulness and the desired impact, if you like, when you make a gift, as opposed to a donation, which is something really very very reactive. Something like donating blood, or it's something you just do out of force of habit. And these two things are very different. So what we're talking about today is how you go about asking for gifts, not asking for donations. We're talking about gifts today. Okay, so first place to start is really to have a look at why do people give? There's a whole range of reasons in the book. There's 20 of them listed out, but we'll just cover off on a few here today, and I'll skip through a few. And Chris, please chime in as well. But there is obviously genuine altruism where people do want to make a difference or to give something back. If they felt fortunate in life or they feel that they want to change or shape their community, then community can be a group that they're a part of. It might be a church, it might be an orchestra. But equally, it could be the physical space in which they live, and they want to give something back and make their mark. And they feel blessed in so many ways in their life, and that's a way of expressing it is through their giving. It's also about reciprocity, in social network terms, about wanting to support others who have supported them. And we often see this, Chris, don't we, where major donors particularly ask others to support their charities with a fully understanding that they in turn will support the prospect's charity.
Yes, it's worth saying that there are certain communities as well. I think that is a very strong reciprocity is very, very strong. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Yeah, yeah.
That's been going on in philanthropy in the UK for many, many, many years, with different communities at different times driving that really powerfully.
Yeah, and you sometimes see major donors that don't want to ask others that they know because they don't want to be asked back. So it works the other way around as well. There's also, particularly for those coming from religious backgrounds, there is a habit. It is part of what your belief system is that you give a certain amount, and we see this in Christian circles with those that tithe and give a percentage, if you like, of their total income every month, every year to charities. It's part of who they are. It's a habit of giving, a philanthropic habit, and that's actually still very strong across the UK. A sense of duty as well. That you have a duty to support, and we've seen this with one or two churches, haven't we, Chris? I was thinking about one in London in particular where the neighbours never attended the church, but they gave very generously for fear, a sense of duty that they were living in the big houses and they felt obliged to maintain the fabric of the church. I think you joked, though, did you not? There was a bit more about not wanting to spoil their view by having the church fall down. But still, there was that neighbourly duty.
Yeah, I think duty is something that we all feel if we have a responsibility about a particular cause. It links into the next one: religious, moral, political, or issues-based belief. if we feel very strongly about something, and I suspect of the 30 plus people on this webinar, we all have particular things that we feel passionately about,
Yeah.
and our sense of responsibility towards them is very powerful. And that can very often motivate giving. But I think what's interesting from our perspective when it comes to larger campaigns is very often that sense of responsibility triggers a lower gift initially, or the response is a lower gift initially. And the trick for us as fundraising people is to make those people who we know are passionate about our cause want to give more generously than they might do or they might have originally thought. And that's where this process becomes really important, because what we're trying to do more than anything else here is raise expectations amongst those who are doing the fundraising, but also those who are giving.
Definitely. And there is a moment in time piece here too, particularly when you're talking about a capital campaign, where people want to be seen to be giving at a particular moment in time from a recognition perspective. And that's why it's really helpful to think about ways that people can dedicate their gifts towards, but if you particularly for capital campaigns, so that donors can actually focus on a specific thing that they may choose to name or at least have their gift associated with it. It's also a way of showing, Chris, I've talked to you about this before, but I ran or did a feasibility study in Queensland, Australia for an aged care home a decade or more ago, and they had raised an enormous amount of money 20 years before to start this aged care home. It was in a rural community. And the names of all the families that had given back 20 years ago were up on the honour board. And with the amounts of money that they'd given at the front entrance to this aged care home. Well, when we did the study, we thought they might want to moderate this slightly in their recognition. But no, 20 years later, they wanted to make sure that the names were up there again. They wanted, in a way, to show who'd done well over the last 20 years and who were no longer the families of the day. It was, if you like, a snapshot about the social history of that community. But I think we've got to be honest and realize that recognition is a big part of major giving and why people choose to do it.
Yeah, I think it's very important to give people the opportunity, if you can, to have their gift recognized.
Mm,
Not all of them will want to take it. We've seen many, many large anonymous gifts over the years.
yeah.
But to have the option there as part of your portfolio, as part of the offer, it is great. It also can be quite fun. And both you and I, Andrew, have worked on capital projects where people have very specifically named a facility, a toilet or something after them, because that just happens to resonate with what it is they want to do. And it works at all levels as well, doesn't it? It's you can have major naming opportunities, but you can have lower level giving recognition, which is really important. And Andrew, you and I both have our names on things in different parts of the country for that lower level, where campaigns we've worked on and we felt it only right if we're encouraging others to make a regular modest gift that can be that will demonstrate our own involvement by doing the same. And it's quite nice to go back to, in my case, say Plymouth or Stratford upon Avon or Warwick, and see my name on a paving stone or on a leaf or on a it's fun. It doesn't cost me a lot of money, but it's a commitment. And I think it's equally, it must be, I've never been in the financial area where I've been able to name something for millions, so I wouldn't know, but I'm sure that's fun as well, in terms of being able to say to people, look, I've helped this to happen, but I'm not going to do it on my own, but I've kickstarted it with a big gift. But having the opportunities at different levels, and you'll all be very aware of the need for this when you're planning your projects. And the same can equally apply to revenue projects. It doesn't always have to be about buildings.
Mm, mm. Very true. And there's also it's a moment for key recognition. So many will choose, if you like, a dedicated gift, something specific to fund in memoriam. It might be in recognition for their parents or a loved one, but equally it could be in recognition of a former teacher or someone that's shaped their lives that they wish to acknowledge or honor. So it's worth remembering that and understanding that the recognition is not just about sticking a personal name on part of the project.
Absolutely, recognizing somebody else's achievements. And you see that very strongly in schools or places of education where, as you said, a particular teacher will have had an influence over a number of students
Yeah,
over the. It could well be that there are generations and networks of those alumni who get together and give in memory of that particular teacher. And
yeah,
collectively, what they raise is quite significant. And we've seen that happen a lot across a range of different clients, but it's an important factor. Why are we telling you all of this? We're telling you all of this because it's really important that you plan how you're going to approach your individual prospects and understand why they may be interested in supporting your project. The final one, of course, is probably the most crucial of the lot. That very often people respond to a personal approach. All the evidence suggests that personal asking is, without doubt, the most effective way of doing it. But it doesn't necessarily mean personal asking for the sake of personal asking. If I go and ask somebody I don't know for money, the chances are they'll find it very easy to say no. If, on the other hand, I go and ask somebody who I do know for money, and I can present a good case for support to them. And if they have respect for me and they know that I am supporting it, they're much more likely to say, yes, I'll join you in supporting this project. And that join me message is really important. So that may be ultimately their primary motivation for wanting to get involved.
exactly. Yeah, very true, Chris. Very, very true. Well, when you prepare, then let's have a look closely at preparing now the steps you need to take to prepare for the ask. You've taken the time to reflect, if you like, on the motivations of your givers and what is it about your project that is likely to encourage them. You're recognizing that you need your approach to be as personal as possible. In fact, Chris, I think it's 80% of the time when you ask someone face to face personally, and you ask them to join you in making a gift, 80% of the time they're going to say yes. So it's worth the effort. So the
Provided,
first, yeah, go on, Chris. Yeah,
provided that what you're asking them to support is something valid that has
yes,
clearly been thought through. Wealthy people are, by definition, have been successful in the main. And they've been successful because they've paid attention to detail and they've thought through their projects. Some have been lucky, of course, that's reality. But the majority of people that we target for large gifts have been successful in their own right, and they've been successful because they've worked to a very clear project plan, and they want to see the same when they're asked, in effect, to make an investment, albeit one without financial return.
yes. So having a clear plan is a good place to start when you're preparing, as Chris just said out there. But it's also about testing the feasibility of that plan before you go into campaign mode. It's a really good idea to go and ask for people's advice before you ask for their money. So if you're engaging them with a draft project plan or a draft case statement, setting out what you want to achieve, and you're asking for their views on that, asking for them to help you shape the final plan, then they're going to feel more inclined to support it later when you approach them for a gift. So,
Absolutely.
and also it's good to get the hard answers out of the way when you're in private phase, isn't it, Chris? Because sometimes the targets can be too big or the plan may not be as well formed as you might like.
Absolutely, but it's also a really important part of the cultivation phase. We're going to come on to cultivation in a bit. I've never forgotten doing a presentation with somebody who I'd worked with at one of the schools, and remember very clearly saying, "Oh, I just wish we'd spoken to more people during the feasibility stage." Because
Yeah.
what transpired is after we'd done the feasibility, and we then sat down with some of the people that we'd identified as being potentially the largest donors with the head, they were the people who came prepared. This is what we're going to do for you. They'd already thought about it. They had made their minds up. They'd listened to the case. And that gave everybody confidence in the early part of the campaign that they were going to win that campaign, which indeed they did. But I think that whole issue of it's about that project plan being tested and
Mm,
tested not by those who want it to happen, but by those who are going to pay for it to happen.
good point. Yes. So, and then that enables us to then set some sensible timetables and milestones. Fundraising, particularly capital fundraising, should not feel like the Battle of the Somme that just goes on and on forever, where you commit wave after wave of resource and events and activities. It's a much more targeted, thoughtful, considered process. And it is a campaign. It's called a campaign because it has a beginning, middle, and an end. In fact, Chris and I joke from time to time that one of the first things we do when we're setting up a campaign is we set the date for the victory party when we're going to celebrate achieving the target, because that focuses the mind, doesn't it, Chris? It sets you gives the fundraising the priority it deserves because you have to get to that date with the money having been pledged.
Yes, and in every campaign there will be key points where a certain number of money needs to have been raised, or the commitment to raising that money has been given. And they can be very useful when you're talking to new audiences, or revisiting people that you may have been cultivating over a period of time, to give them a bit of a soft deadline, if you like,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
confirming their gift.
yeah. And beginning by recruiting some core levels of support from amongst your own, if you like, leadership group in your organization is really important. That support is clarified, that people understand what they're getting involved in, and that you don't feel like you're just Don Quixote charging at the windmill on your own. And in so many ways too, that's all part of the feasibility stage of a campaign, is testing that core level of support local, at the leadership level in your organization.
Very much so. And I think understanding how each individual prospect will respond to, and who they will respond to best.
Mm.
Peer-to-peer asking remains preeminent, but in some organizations, what the person that the donor or the prospect particularly wants to hear from is the person leading that organization. So
Yeah.
whether that's the head of a school, or the dean of a cathedral, or the project director of a hospital, they want to hear. And I got criticized by a school governor recently for using this phrase. They want to hear from the organ grinder, not the monkey.
Yes, okay, fair point. But so true. They need to be hear from the leadership, the vision carrier, rather than the organ grinder, possibly the one that's really, championing this next phase in the growth of the organization. But you also need to capture that vision in suitable sort of promotional materials. That can obviously be in the form of brochures, which is a handy but a memoir to a face-to-face ask, and it should be written in that way. It's not a document that you would want to post, but it's a document you'd want to present personally and take people through. It's a script almost for the face-to-face ask. But also, you need materials that really satisfy all the sort of regulatory and organizational requirements. There are certain gift policies that you will need to have agreed with the governing body before you begin your fundraising, so as to set things off on the right foot. Now, an example of that could be just simply that, as we talked about earlier, the list of dedicated gifts and an amount that you will accept as a gift for naming those things. Best to agree that before you start asking for gifts, rather than when the check is sitting on the table and you're debating whether or not you should accept it for that purpose.
Very much so. It's part of that planning, that preparation. You'll never know everything, but as much as you can possibly know is really valid, because people will ask you questions.
Mm.
As I said before, we're talking about intelligent donor prospects here, and intelligent donor prospects will ask intelligent questions, and therefore you need to be prepared to be able to answer them as best you possibly can. The caveat to that, of course, is if you don't know the answers and you're absolutely sure you don't know the answers, say so, and say you'll come back to them with the correct answer in due course.
So ultimately, that's it's summed up here in that final bullet point, is just don't jump in. I've seen some monumental failures where people stick up the thermometer outside the church and just start fundraising, having not done this sort of preparation, and inevitably things start to unravel almost on day one. So it's really important to do the preparation first before you start to ask. Key considerations here, Chris. Do you have the resources to deliver the project? That's obviously the volunteer resources, but also the management resources for the campaign. Who's going to lead the project? Who's going to be the public face? And if it is your priest in charge or your CEO, have they committed the time? Can they clear their diary for at least 20% of their week to commit to the project? Who are the major prospects out there? Who will help you actually raise the money? The ambassadors, the influential members of your community to step out and open doors for you. And does the project fit genuinely with the values and vision of your organization? Is it core business? Is this something that will motivate your stakeholders to get involved? And is it really addressing your long-term sustainability as an organization? There
So,
many other, aren't there?
yeah, just to come in there, I think again, if we consider the motivations of donors, and some of their concerns. They want to know the project's been properly thought through. They want to know that it's being driven by the right people. They want to understand that they're not just going to throw their money into a dream that may never be realized. It's interesting, isn't it, that a lot of the major or number of the major grant making trusts will only make a commitment once they know that a certain amount of money's already been raised. That confidence, we have to instill confidence in our prospects. And we need to be prepared when we're planning for an ask to go in and be able to demonstrate that we are confident the project is not only going to achieve its target, but actually it's going to fulfill the ambitions that are being portrayed.
Mm,
Nobody wants to invest in something that's going to end up being a white elephant.
mm. It's
They
all
want
about it's about risk, isn't it, Chris?
It's very much about risk, and donors are as risk averse as because that's how they've been trained very often in their business lives. They want to know that they can give with confidence, and that gift's going to have impact. And we can plan and prepare for that by understanding what it is that might motivate them and making sure that our project, our ask, is as robust as it possibly can be.
Definitely. So, for example, make sure you get your planning permission in place, or your quinquennial, not quinquennial, or your faculty, I should say, if you're a church. A quinquennial is the process of understanding what the project might be, but the actual faculty gives the legal permission to get on with the work, and it's such an important step to take before you start asking for money. Otherwise, you'll have to, if it doesn't work out, you'll have to hand the money back, which is even more painful. Anyway, so they're key considerations to have. But the next thing is really about identifying your prospects. Now, I hope you can see this. If not, you will when you get your copy of the book. It technically is called evaluation and rating. It's a way of understanding who you should ask, or what steps you might need to do to get a prospect to the right place where your likelihood of being successful in asking is going to be increased. Now, let me explain this to you. You'll see down the left-hand side, there are four criteria. Their capacity to give. This is examining an individual prospect. What is their capacity to give at the level that you want them to give at? Your access to them. What's the status of your access? How engaging can you be? And the next one is their propensity to give. We all know many wealthy people who never give to charity, and equally some with not so much money that give everything they've got. And it's that old adage, the sheep and the goats, the givers and those who don't give. So propensity is a way of determining whether they're a giver or not. And then crucial fourth indice is their interest, not just in your organization, but in this particular project. Now, you see in the grade areas, the questions that you might ask, and you could have your own versions of these when you want to assess the prospects. So, Chris, do you want to run us through some of those? Save me talking all the time.
Well, I think overarchingly, I did a workshop that's similar to this not so long ago for a client, and afterwards, when we'd done the workshop, we sat around with a list of prospects or potential prospects that the client had produced, and that there were 10 of us sat around and we went through this, and what it enabled us to do was ask questions about their levels of interest. We could understand wealth, but most importantly, how are we going to engage with them? That access one is really important. How it's all very well having a name on a piece of paper, but actually, do we know them? Can we pick up the phone? Can we make a time? Can we arrange a time to meet? And what we were able to do with that client was take a list of 50 or 60 names and get it down to the 20 that we thought were most
Mm,
likely.
mm,
We then were able to allocate them across the volunteer leadership and the staff. It was a school and the head as well to make sure that each of those prospects would be approached within a reasonable time frame to engage about this particular project that the school's seeking to raise money for. And that puts everybody, it's part of this planning phase. It means you're not chasing your own tails, trying to speak to people who may have no interest and who may not have the capacity. What you're doing is focusing on those most likely to give. And that's a really important step in this planning process. And as we sit here today talking about getting ready to ask, what we're really doing is getting ourselves and our volunteers in the most comfortable place to approach their contacts, their connections and ask. And if there is a blind contact, that's where the default position always has to be the chief executive, the leader of the organization. That's their job and their responsibility. And if we've planned properly, we know that that individual is ready for the challenge.
And so if you just to run through the sheet then, thank you, Chris. the four levels, capacity, access, propensity, and interest, are each scored out of 25. And the sorts of questions under each, for example, as you can see for capacity, is do we know what sort of wealth indicators at this target level? So if they're on the rich list, for example, then that's a great wealth indicator. If they're known to, doing very well their business locally, or they've inherited wealth, or those, then that would give them a high score on that level. Often lives in prosperous areas. I've seen searches done on databases simply on the basis of, does the house have a name? If it does, it's more likely than not going to be a prosperous household. So there you go. But equally, you can use postcodes, and we all know that there are certain suburbs or areas in our community, certain streets, which are considered to be more prosperous. That might be a way of indicating that score. Do they have a public profile as a high net worth individual? And it's not just a question of what car they drive, but are they seen locally to be wealthy? And do they have high net worth employment or business interests? So you would make, let's say, those scores up out of 25. Now you can see next to this, we've listed out some fictional names. See you sometime, William Leader, Max Donor, I am in. I love that one. Maybe later, and so on. And what it does when you just looking at capacity is you can see that the score, for example, for see you sometime is very high, because of the known published wealth indicators and their profile, etc. So that gives them a score of 20 out of 25. Whereas someone such as maybe later is not really well known. Now, what you could do then is focus some effort to research that maybe later to find out a bit more about where she lives, for example, and that might help you with the prosperous area question and the score. Do you see my point? So it gives you a process to develop that prospect pipeline, is the phrase often used, by giving them their scores on capacity. Similarly, if you go down the list, you'll see access, as Chris was talking about. Again, a possible top score is 25, but simply do we have their contact details? Have we got established communication links and so on through this list? Obviously, if they're on your mailing list, that's a very good sign. But if you've also got their mobile number, that's even better. And at each, so propensity and interest, you can see the categories to be examined, and each gets a score then totaling out of 100. And the higher the score, Chris, the readier they are really to be asked. So,
Absolutely. And
yeah,
that's the critical point. What we're trying to get to is that premium list, if you like, the top 20 that we can go and, as I said before, we can allocate out, we can go and meet, and we can crack on with the campaign, with the private phase, the asking, the individual one-to-one asking. Let's move on because I'm conscious of time.
yeah, will do. A simple point here is that you get your long list down to a short list with focused activity then, so that you understand who you need to ask personally. But then it's about setting out your case. Chris, do you want to lead on through this?
So as we've said before, ultimately people will give to things that they feel passionately about and that they know will have an impact. And that is really what's set out in the case. What is it that the organization is doing well? Past achievements are important, but actually what we're talking about is why they're raising money now. What is the need? And it's a need that isn't a needy need. It's not a disaster. It's not a challenge. This is something that's going to make the organization better. It's about vision for the future, and about the impact and benefits that the project, be that a capital building, be that a revenue project, be that bursaries in the case of schools, it will transform people's lives in some way, shape, or form, or it will transform the core business of the organisation. So it could be a theatre, a theatre having a new space that's going to be dedicated to community work and community performances, as opposed to its main auditorium being refurbished. It could be a cathedral that's building an education centre. It could be a church that's having a new organ because that's going to transform the musical output, not for necessarily for the services, but actually for the work that can be done in the community more generally. Ultimately, the case needs to be signed off by the leadership of the organization. This has to be a collective vision because that gives it credibility and gives it strength. But really important that before we go in and see anybody to talk about asking and to discuss the whole concept of supporting, that we have this case firmly nailed down, because the case alongside the personal connections, those are the two things that are really going to drive a donor's interest.
So to and ultimately, this needs to be signed off by your leadership group, whether it's your trustee board, your PCC, or whomever, so that everyone agrees this is what you want to achieve and these are the benefits that will be generated. Do not start talking to your donors until everybody on your leadership group has signed off on your case for support. Absolutely vital.
Yeah.
So then we try and express in the scale of giving, and many of you will have seen these, how you might achieve a target. Now, the principles that apply here, firstly, it's around the 80-20 rule. It's 80% of this £2 million target is going to come, indeed, in this case, from those top 14 gifts that you can see in column 5. But equally, too, what we're recognizing here with something like a scale of giving is that the top gift tends to be between 10 to 15% of the target, and in fact, more than half the amount that will be raised from a relatively small number. Often, in the top 10 to 15 gifts, half the target is achieved. So in this particular scale of giving, just to set it out for you, if you focus on column 5, that's the number of gifts needed at the level set out in column 4. And you can see there the top gift of 250,000 is well over 10% of the target. But equally, those top 14 gifts are achieving over half the target. 214 gifts needed in total, ranging from £1,000 upwards. And when you look at column 3, that is the gross gift given each year for 5 years, including the gift aid. But actually, column 2 shows how much, what size check, if you like, the donor needs to write and sign the gift aid declaration. So for £1,000, the donor needs to write a check for £160 and sign a gift aid declaration that grosses it up to £200 each year for 5 years, makes £1,000. Column 1 shows how little that is then for the higher rate taxpayer, the 40% taxpayer, who can then reclaim a rebate of an additional £40 a year when they submit their income tax return. But the scale of giving is something that just is a framework, really, to try and help people understand how to achieve really big targets, sums of money that are not part of our day-to-day lives. Chris, what do you think?
I'll say, yeah, the framework piece is really important. It gives confidence to our volunteers. It gives confidence to our leadership that we're not asking everybody to support this project. But if you go back to the prospect evaluation that we talked about a couple of slides ago, what we're trying to do here is match people to these specific levels so that we can focus our attention on, in this case, those top 14 gifts as soon as we possibly can. Then we've got credibility in the campaign, we've got credibility in the fundraising, and everybody, I'm not saying everybody relaxes, but everybody's much more confident the target's going to be achieved.
Definitely. So that prospect and evaluation rating sheet is really, we particularly focus using that tool on who are those top 14 gifts at the levels that we need there of 50, 100 and 250,000. And we focus our efforts and research on that and understanding how we're going to engage those prospects. That's where the scale and the rating process fit together. Okay. So Chris, do you want to talk to us about how do we cultivate our prospects to
Well,
get to this point?
very quickly, the process here, that donut, as I'm going to call it, um, information. The first thing I want to say is information events are anything from a large scale event that invites 100 people into a room to talk about a project down to a one-to-one meeting. These are events in the broadest possible sense. They are gatherings of people, be they very small or very large. Each one needs to be planned properly. So if it's a big presentation in front of lots of people, you've got to have all the right tools and the right speakers in place. If it's an individual meeting, you're much more around what are the motivations, who are you going to see, what are their interests, what will be, why might they be interested in this project. Obviously, the invitation piece is really important. It needs to be personal. You can't, I see a lot of schools who will just put a date in a diary in an email and hope that people will turn up. It needs to be more personal than that. So whether that's named, tailored invitations addressed to specific people, or in the case of an individual, it's a telephone call or a personal email, but it's not a blanket invitation.
Mm.
The delivery of the information event itself, again, it needs to be properly thought through. Make sure that is done in the in the most effective possible ways, the right ambience, the right setting. Some people are more suited to a casual cup of coffee or a casual pint. Others want to be wined and dined. You've got to be very specific in your understanding of what's going to trigger the right response and reactions from those donors. The bigger events tend to be a little bit more standard in shape, arrival, drinks, time for a chat, time for people to network, making sure that you're getting around the right people. Then a bit of formal presentation of that, but most importantly, the chance at the end for people to come up and ask individual questions that they maybe were reluctant to ask in public. And most important to all information events is follow up. And follow up, understanding that you can't just expect people to walk away from an event and give you money. They're simply not going to do that without the right level of follow up. Now, that's not necessarily a pushy follow up. And one of the reasons how we can control and manage follow ups, Andrew, if you flicks to the next screen, is through use of, in the old days and still relevant, are response cards, written cards printed specifically for an event that somebody could complete in confidence, hand in confidence. That what we really, but these days equally there are QR codes that can go on cards that people can link. What we're trying to find out is who is interested in making a tax effective gift and they'd like to have more information. Are they potentially people who'd like to host an information event themselves? Would they be willing to invite or engage with other people to encourage them to support? And perhaps as importantly as any, who are the ones that don't want to be involved?
Exactly.
If you've got a group of 50 people all coming together at one time, the chances are that at least 50% of them are not going to want to be involved. And the
Mm.
sooner we know that, then we can put them to one side, make a note, and we don't have to bother them, and we don't have to worry about how we're going to follow up with them. This is again part of that focus that we need to bring to our asking process and plan for that focus by making sure that what we're asking, what we're trying to find out is the information that we need to be as effective and efficient as we possibly can be, because successful fundraising is based on efficiency as much as anything else.
So we do need to know or allow people to say no,
Yep.
without risk of losing them as friends or causing upset. So these response cards are a great way to get people to declare their direction. I'm interested. I want to talk some more. I actually want to share this with others. Can I also host an information event? Or no, thank you. This isn't right for me at this time. And that's perfect. That makes our lives as professional fundraisers so much easier. And it enables you to focus on where the money is rather than where it isn't. So your information event is not about asking for money. It is about providing information to your prospects so that they can declare whether or not they want to go further in a conversation about how to give. So, asking in challenging times. And some might say these are challenging times, Chris. And I think certainly across the independent school sector, it's been very challenging. And I think through the cost of living crisis and people having to watch very carefully and make very clear choices, I think, about where they put their money. It's appropriate that when you're approaching prospects for gifts, that you're sensitive at the moment, that you remember that many people and companies, for that matter, may also not be suffering at all. In fact, some are making very good money at this time. So don't just assume the worst in all circumstances. But crucially, let's not be tempted to write letters. As remember, 80% of the time when you speak to someone face to face, you are going to succeed in securing a gift. So that is the best way to approach people for money. And it also causes the least offense. And people often are very eager to hear good news. So when you're talking about your project and fundraising, make sure you start by showing the success factors that you have, or whether it's, you've got your planning consent or you've got a certain amount raised already, or even that all the members of your governing body have shown leadership and made their own gifts and would be really keen to see you as a prospect join them. That's good news. But crucially, do your research first for each and every major prospect before you go in and ask them.
Yeah, absolutely. Just be prepared. This is what this webinar is about, getting ready to ask. And these are all things that you need to be conscious of, but don't be scared and don't allow your leadership to say, oh, there's a cost of living crisis. We couldn't possibly ask people for money now. There are always people who are willing to respond and can afford to respond, irrespective. Andrew and I, are old enough and long in the tooth enough to work through various financial crises over the years. And we've always seen people give when they've needed to, provided the case is good and the approach is done in the right way.
Remember, there was over £10 billion given away in Britain last financial year by people like you and me. Not just the wealthy. The ordinary people of Britain are phenomenally generous, but they expect to be asked properly and for projects that are really well set out. So, when you're bringing leadership to this journey, if we could describe it that way, of your fundraising, you need to find a champion and secure their gifts first. So I would suggest you look to your own governing bodies, your own trustee group initially, and because effectively, if they can't be convinced to support the project you're wanting to raise funds for, it's very unlikely you're going to get others to do what they're not prepared to do. But also think yourself about your own giving to the project and be really thoughtful in the gift that you make. It's not about how much you give; it's more the statement, the step you take in doing that, because then you're able to ask others to join you rather than telling them what to do.
I think just to come in there, Andrew, given that I suspect most of the people on this call are professionals rather than volunteers,
Yeah,
that's the key message to take to your volunteer leadership. You know,
correct.
this is why you need them to make that first commitment to you, because they will then find it easier when they're asking others, their peers, to support, because that join me message is crucial. It softens the ask inexorably. It really does make a difference. So we as professionals, and the majority of this audience in this webinar are professionals, this is what we've got to be saying to our volunteers. You support because you're demonstrating your commitment, and that's going to make it much easier to demonstrate your others. And that's all going to help to build confidence. We're going to get those early runs on the board, if you excuse the cricket analogy. We're going to get those runs on the board, and we're going to make sure that people realize this campaign's heading in the right direction.
Mm,
Our role as professionals is we're going to give them professional prospect profiles. Who are they going to see? What information do they need to know? That's where FAQs about the project become important. We use those information events, those one-to-one meetings, to the large scale events, the medium scale events, to make sure that we are going to get some benefit out of that. We're going to understand our potential prospect pool even better. Again, buddying up. This is a role that very often the professional needs to do. The volunteer remains nervous, so we're going to hold their hand,
yeah.
but make sure that we're holding their hand in the right way. It's up to them to do the talking. We're there to be the safety net, if you like, and to make sure at the very end of a meeting, they do make an ask. And both Andrew and I have sat in long, very convivial meetings where it's been wonderful. And then literally the leader of the organisation or the volunteers got up and said, "It's been great seeing you. Must catch up again soon." And you go, "Hang on a second. We've spent an hour talking about this £5 million project.
Yeah.
Is it something you might wish to support?"
Mm.
That then starts the conversation.
Actually, it's worth remembering the number one reason people don't give is because they're not asked.
And ultimately, as professionals, as the people who sit behind the scenes making this all work, we need to be efficient in everything that we do.
Yeah. So the next webinar, we're going to get, this is a week today on the 17th of June, and we do hope you've registered or are able to join us same time. We're going to go through these 5 steps to successful asking. We're actually going to take all the preparation work we've set out today and then put them into an ask. And we'll even look at some case studies of some asks so that you can see how that's been applied and some of the pitfalls that can happen and how you might attend to them. So that's in a week's time on the 17th of June. We'll look at the 5 steps to successful asking. And before we take questions now in the chat, Chris, you'll need to read them out to me. But those of you who would like your own complimentary copy of the book, Gifted Asking, please email julie.day@giftedphilanthropy.com. And I'm going to leave that up there while we go through any questions, Chris. And we'll happily get a copy out in the post to you. So please email julie.day@giftedphilanthropy.com.
Okay, questions. So we had one which I've answered just on text, but I'm going to answer, I'm just going to give it to you all. Will this webinar be available? Yes, it will be. It's being recorded. It will be edited. It'll be on our website in due course. Can't give you an exact date, but quite soon. So the first question, is there a place for unrestricted asks versus project-specific asks in major donor fundraising?
Yeah. Massively, yes. And that's about the strength of the vision of the organization overall. It's the ideal gift is an unrestricted gift. most CFOs or bursars will cherish those moments where you come in with an unrestricted gift. But I would go through the same process though. The vision still needs to be clearly articulated, and it needs to be progressive. It needs to be talking about opportunities in the future. If you like, it's like a business prospectus. It's about saying, with this investment, what could be achieved or what the challenges are that you want to address in the future. And you need unrestricted funding to do that.
Yeah, very important. I say it's faith in the institution rather than the project will produce unrestricted gifts. You'll see it very often. You'll see it's very often linked to those high level network circles, call them what you will, where there is no specific project at the end of it, but it is unrestricted support. But you can only do that if people have faith in what the organization is doing and trust in the organization's ability to deliver it. Because one thing we have learned over the years is that major gift donors will not fund projects that they think are going to fail or organizations that are failing.
Correct. And often, by the way, an unrestricted major gift comes through a gift in a will, through a legacy or bequest. So don't forget to keep asking proactively for gifts in wills.
Okay. Our next question, and I'm assuming this has come from Lisa. Lisa, you asked with that level of target, I'm assuming the 2 million shown in the scale being the example, but how many people would you expect to be working on this size campaign? Well, it's a really interesting point. 20 odd years ago, most institutions did not have in-house fundraising teams, or if they did, they were very limited. And so both Andrew and myself, in our young days as consultants, went in and worked in-house on campaigns.
Yeah.
That the role of campaign manager, the person that coordinates and drives everything, known very often as the insistent voice, is the one person that's most important to it. You don't need dozens of people working on a campaign professionally. You need to have a good team of volunteer leaders who will pick out specific roles, tasks within your structure. But in terms of professional, how many people would you expect to be working on a campaign of £2 million? One or two professionals, half a dozen volunteers would be my guess, would give you a good starting point.
You do. That's a core leadership group, Chris. I mean, we used to apply a sort of formula. Say you're looking for 200 gifts on a scale of giving, and you're looking for a team of ambassadors to go out and help secure those gifts. Obviously, each ambassador would be necessary to make their own gift before asking others to join them. But then we generally used to work on the basis that they would get 5 gifts within the scale of giving. So if you divide the total of gifts that you require by effectively 6, or maybe 5 if you include their gift within the 5, that should give you the number of ambassadors. Now, some ambassadors will get 10 gifts and others will get none. That's the nature of life. But it just gave some sort of framework. Then try and group them in teams. So one group might look at a particular piece of geography or a particular, alumni group or a particular parent group or a particular type of business group, and those teams of generally no more than 5 or 6 in each team would give you a way of focusing, if you like, the fundraising team across different prospect pools. And that often makes it easier to manage. It also means, funnily enough, you can get some sort of competition going sometimes between these teams to see who's got the most gifts or raised the most money. And a good campaign manager will build that bit of narrative up in the weekly comms that they'll put out. I'm just going to drop the slideshow down, Chris, so that everyone can see us. Go on, though. Next
Well,
question.
so one more question. So, how would you suggest working around a lack of financial support at board level in your messaging, given the points you've just made about leadership at senior level internally? It's a real challenge, this. I think different organizations, what we have in the UK is we have a lot of trustee boards that have evolved over a period of time, may not have been audited, and there are various specific skills. And the people who bring those skills to the trustee board will say, well, my job's not to give money. I'm here to advise on the legalities of the organization, or I'm here to help deliver that. And we see trustee boards that have been made up of, for argument's sake, academics within an academic sphere, but don't have any commercial connections. And, there comes a point where you have to look at your board and say, can we expect major financial support from this board? Well, in all likelihood, no. That doesn't mean to say the principle of them supporting shouldn't be established.
Mm.
Why? Andrew and I will go back to a big theatre project 20 years ago now, where we sat in a room on a transatlantic call, having told the client the first thing that they were going to be asked was, has your board all given? And sure enough, the question was asked, and the director of the theatre was able to say, yes, they have. Now, what they didn't say, and rightly so, was that one person on the board had given £1 million and another person on the board had given £50.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, he could put his hand up and say, there are 12 people on my board and they've all given to this project. And that's the principle we're trying to establish. The, the way round it, which in your question, how do you suggest working around it? And Andrew, hopefully you'll agree with this, is that's where your campaign board or your development board comes in, because that is a group that you can recruit who will guide the fundraising, having already given themselves.
Yeah.
And that is a condition of being on the campaign board or on the development board. The first thing they do is say, I'm going to support it. And this is the level I'm going to support it. So you're almost bypassing your board of governors, your board of trustees. Yes, you're encouraging them to support, but in the pure fundraising process, in the campaign, you've got a different group of leaders whose job it is purely and simply to focus on working with you to get the money in the bank.
Spot on. Completely agree. Leadership by example is the most powerful factor for successful fundraising. Without it, you can almost guarantee the campaign will fail. And I've been doing this nearly 40 years now. But where you see it, even it's not about the size of the gifts, it's the principle. And where you see leadership stepping up and putting their money down, you could almost guarantee the campaign will succeed. It's a really, really powerful factor.
Right. Well, it's 3 minutes to 11. Thank you, everybody, ever so much for attending. As I just said before, we've recorded this. It will be edited. It will be available on our website. If you've booked to come next week, you'll be seeing Amy and Andrew rather than me and Andrew. But it'll be a really interesting, I think, second part.
Wow, I think we've just lost Chris. So yeah, you're back, mate. We lost you there for a moment. I don't know
But I didn't disappear from my own screen. Anyway, I just want to say thank you to everybody. We've got somebody to say thank you. So thanks ever so much. Andrew, you can round us off.
No, well, you have. Thank you all. See you next Tuesday, same time, 10 o'clock for part two, where we get to the 5 steps to successfully asking for a gift. Have a great week, everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.